Well, it's finally come to this. Episode 3 of Arcane, where dreams are crushed, trauma is born, and men and women alike are unmade in tearful breakdowns. Abandon all hope, ye who enter here. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. If you're new around here, let me just set the scene real quick. This video is part of a series where I deep dive into the animated TV series Arcane, one episode at a time, in order to nerd out about how great it is. As always, while this video mainly covers stuff happening in episode 3, I will be jumping back and forth through other episodes, hence the spoiler warning for the whole series. Watch Arcane first, and then come back here. You know the drill by now. Videos analyzing episode 1 and 2 also exist if you haven't seen them, and otherwise strap in boys and girls and welcome aboard the trauma train. Next stop is Sadness Central, also known as Arcane episode 3, the base violence necessary for change. On their first viewing, many a confused soul probably checked to see if the episode was actually playing, as we are treated to 26 seconds of black screen. As is tradition by now, the episode opens with a flashback. We are gently serenaded by Kelsey Hahn's operatic vocals and Jason Spicak's crisp voice as he delivers his brilliant monologue about drowning.
Ever wonder what it's like to drown?
There is so much to pick apart in this scene, it's actually kinda crazy. This scene shows if not the defining moment for Silco and why he became who he is. This flashback takes place around the same time as the uprising shown in the prologue for episode 1. Vander and Silco seem to have been the main architects in rallying the Undercity against Piltover all those years ago. But their ideologies eventually clashed as Vander realized that nothing, not even independence, was worth all the suffering it caused. Vander then betrayed Silco and tried to drown him. As Silco says, drowning is a story of opposites. There is a luring, dangerous peace in water, but the vicious, instinctual struggle for survival is anything but peaceful. This contrast encapsulates Vander's and Silco's clashing ideologies. Vander wants peace, wants to remain neutral and passive. But Silco believes that this is akin to giving up, to letting someone be drowned as Piltover keeps taking and taking, leaving them with nothing. Instead of choosing what Silco perceives as the easy way out, he wants to fight, wants to go down swinging, instead of rolling over and accepting the status quo. Vander is shown towering above Silco, an immovable object in the way of change, seemingly dragging Silco and everyone else into the water to drown. The soft operatics in the background is like a siren song, luring Silco to simply give in, to give up, to choose the so-called easy path of neutrality and inaction. Silco thinks inaction is the ultimate sin. In reality, there are obviously pros and cons to both Vander and Silco's approaches to leadership. Silco's plan of action with regards to standing up against Piltover with his Shimmer-empowered soldiers arguably doesn't bring much benefit either, but that's for a later discussion. This scene represents Silco's baptism, his rebirth. The Silco he was before this event, the one he perceives as a weaker man willing to give up the fight, is shown in calm blue waters with both his eyes still intact. This peaceful manifestation shows his innocence, lost by the betrayal of his sworn brother. The man he becomes is shown fighting and clawing his way back to life in the murky and toxic waters of the River Pilt. A new man is born, one filled with determination and a hatred for inaction. While Silco sees the person he is after this event as one with a steel resolve and a stubborn determinism, it's very clear as we see later that this event still haunts Silco and that Vander is still part of him somehow. Silco's insecurities regarding betrayal, which heavily influences how and why he manipulates Jinx later on, all stems from the betrayal he suffered at the hands of Vander. In a way, Silco is the monster that Vander created. In this monologue, Silco thanks Vander for forcing him to face the choice of giving up or fighting tooth and nail for survival. Realizing what it takes to survive shaped Silco into who he became. This is similar to how Jinx says to Vi that she made Jinx, which begins the trend of parallels between these four characters and their stories, but we will dive much deeper into that later on. The episode then continues from where we last left off. Vi thinks the enforcers have come to arrest her, but Vander has figured her out and gets there first. Trying to one-up her in who can sacrifice themselves the hardest, he decides to take the fall instead of her. At this point he tells her something that I think really sticks with her.
You've got a good heart. Don't ever lose it. No matter how the world tries to break you. Protect the family.
Vi remembers this through all the awfulness she's later put through.
You have a good heart.
So it clearly has a deep impact on her.
You've got a good heart.
No!
It also pretty much sums up most of Vi's character. Someone put through trial after trial by circumstances beyond her control, but never breaking completely. And through it all, her main priority is protecting what family she has left.
Without you down here, it all falls apart.
Grayson is clearly surprised that Vander hasn't turned in the actual culprit, but instead himself. She knows the balance of power in the Undercity is delicate, and Vander going away puts it all at risk. She knows that whoever assumes power after him is not likely to be as cooperative with Topside. It is a little surprising that Grayson doesn't just insist that they arrest Vi. She can clearly hear her banging on the door, but she probably knows that Vander would never let that happen. And this is the point where the show truly turns dark. You thought this was a kids show? Think again. Over these first episodes, the tone has steadily shifted from a relatively light-hearted kids adventure story into straight-up horror and soon-to-be tragedy. While this turn is supposed to be shocking, it's not entirely without warning. The prologue to episode 1 already set the tone right off the bat and warned us of what was to come. Both in tone and in terms of narrative, episode 3 is very much a payoff of what the prologue established from the very beginning.
This wasn't the deal!
Marcus must have told Silco that they were going in for the arrest, or perhaps they were followed. Whatever deal they had probably involved capturing or killing Vi and Vander, but Grayson died in the crossfire. This was all a part of Silco's plan in order to insert Marcus as the next sheriff. With no witnesses to the massacre, Marcus would have to incriminate himself to give up Silco, which means from now on and basically for the rest of his life he's under Silco's control. The figurative and literal blood money handed to him is a nice touch. As I mentioned earlier, it's a damn shame that Grayson dies so soon. We get one more scene with her in episode 5, but that's it. I was really interested in her character and her relationship with Vander. I think most people were a little surprised that she was killed off so soon, especially since her voice actress Shoria Agdashlo is quite a big name.
Where are you going with this?
Wherever I goddamn like.
Vi bears witness to Benzo and Grayson being killed and Vander being kidnapped, which is unfortunately just the beginning of the trauma this day has in store for her. While the kids in the Undercity are having the worst day of their lives, Jace and Victor are casually trying to crack Hextech in the ruins of Jace's apartment. Jace mentions that the enforcers confiscated all the crystals, but in reality they only took the one that was left on his examination device thing, while Powder took the rest. Of course, in the chaos and confusion, no one has noticed where the missing crystals actually ended up.
Our Hextech Dream.
As a totally unrelated aside, I'm constantly amazed at the matte paintings and environments in this show. I'm especially impressed by how effectively the matte paintings pull off the illusion of full 3D environments. Almost all of Arcane's scenes are made up of one or more 2D hand-painted matte paintings with 3D elements layered on top, such as the characters, certain props, and things that need to move across the frame. As an example, take the beautiful elevator sequence from episode 1 when we're first introduced to the Undercity. There are quite a few layers to the animation in this scene. At the very front we've got the chain hanging in front of the camera, which is most likely just a flat 2D drawing layered on top of everything. Next up we have the building to the left starting to come into view, and the catwalk with all the people milling about. Interestingly, I would guess that these are the only 3D elements in this scene. I'm fairly sure that the buildings to the side and of course the matte painting in the background are all flat 2D elements. If we skip ahead a bit, we can see that these buildings haven't shifted perspective much, even though they've moved up the frame. However, the speed at which they move relative to the camera gives the illusion of perspective. Since they're closer to the camera than the background, they are naturally moving faster, as we expect. This effect is called parallax and is very effective at providing a sense of depth to the scene. On top of this, these 2D elements are warped slightly using perspective projection. I won't go into how this works. Brushing up on this topic on Wikipedia gave me flashbacks to my image analysis exam in university, where I completely blanked on how image projection worked. Yikes, not a good time. But anyway, perspective projection is used to transform 2D textures into something that seemingly has depth from the point of view of the observer. In conclusion, these buildings on the sides are most likely all 2D, just flat cutouts with texture painted on them. The matte painting in the background also moves slightly, the pace of which is realistic for how far away it is. It's also far less detailed, which not only saves time to actually paint, but also doesn't end up hurting the visuals, since the distance means we can't actually make out all the intricacies anyway, so painting them would be a waste of time. This walkway, and most likely all the people on it, are 3D, since the perspective changes more than would be possible for a 2D drawing. This mixing of 2D and 3D is not necessarily a revolutionary thing, but the impressive part is how cleverly the techniques are utilized and just how damn well it all mixes together. The 3D elements are brushed up with a painted aesthetic that makes them blend in, and the 2D elements are given enough detail and cleverly utilized to almost look 3D. This seamless blending is where the animation of Arcane becomes something truly special. On top of this, it's also a very efficient and relatively cheap process, all things considered. Painting 2D textures and using trickery to make them look 3D saves the time of modeling full 3D props that are only ever seen from one angle anyway. The animators can also get away with using matte paintings, which are simply static images to fill out the background, instead of meticulously modeling complete 3D scenes with full spatial dimensions. I was primarily inspired to talk about this by a video from the Corridor Digital YouTube channel, specifically their Animators React video for Arcane. I urge you to check this video out, it gives insight into a bunch of cool aspects of animation used in Arcane. There will of course be a link in the description. Now, that is not to say that there are no 3D environments in Arcane. Scenes such as these probably rely on different techniques and require heavier use of 3D environments. Phew, that was a hefty animation detour. Alright, enough fun, let's dive back into the sadness again. Poor Ekko, he saw everything. He also followed Silco to the old cannery at the docks, so Vi knows exactly where to go from here. It's not unthinkable that Silco knew about Ekko and his tendency to follow people. After all, the whole plan was to lead all the kids to the cannery, so it's possible that Ekko, just like the rest of the kids, played right into his plans. This hug between Vi and Ekko is closely mirrored in episode 7, many years later, which is the next time we will see the two of them together again. Oh yeah, and I guess this is relevant. Why you gotta break my heart, Amanda? Haven't we suffered enough? As Vander is dragged through Silco's warehouse of horror, we see things from his perspective as he groggily comes to and discovers the extent of Silco's monstrous plans. Jump cuts and lens distortions puts us in Vander's confused frame of mind and makes the weapon and shimmer production even more jarring and horrifying. This weird pulsating organ thing is very unsettling. It seems to be pumping out the shimmer, which is filtered and collected in the vials below. I would imagine that this pulsating thing is connected to Rio in some way. Perhaps it's an organ extracted from the creature, which is awful to think about. Silco wants a friendly chat with his old buddy before all hell breaks loose. I love the dialogue between the two in this scene, it's so fascinating and exceptionally well written. The relationship between Silco and Vander is super interesting to me. I would have loved to have seen even more of it, especially since Jason Spisak and JB Blanc, the voices of Silco and Vander respectively, seem like good buddies in real life and play off each other really well. But alas, nothing good ever lasts in Arcane, it seems. There is clearly a lot of history between these two. Once upon a time they were like brothers, working towards the same goal of an independent other city, free from the clutches of Piltover.
We shared a vision, Vander. A dream of freedom.
This is an example of fantastic storytelling and world building. Arcane has a talent for giving us glimpses of the past and of the broader world. This grounds the story not only as one place in a larger world, but also as just one period of time in a longer history. This makes the world feel grander and more lived in. Instead of everything being contained to the here and now, there are untold stories elsewhere and in the past. Mostly, stories beyond the main plot are not spelled out or explicitly shown, apart from in brief flashbacks or mentions in dialogue. The story gives us just enough clues to piece things together if we care to. In this regard, and indeed in almost every way, Arcane truly respects the audience and expects them to pay attention and put in the effort to connect all the dots, which I appreciate immensely. There is nothing worse than a show talking down to you or holding your hand the whole way through.
There I still don't understand. Can you imagine what it's like?
I love this transition. The animation style seamlessly jumps from the 3D model of Silco's eye to the 2D of the flowing blood. Every 2D hand-drawn effect in Arcane is a layer overlaid on top of everything else, whether that be a matte painting, a character, or a prop. You can clearly see the separation between 2D and 3D if we go frame by frame. The 2D blood effects are animated on 2s, meaning they only move every other frame, so 12 frames per second. You can just barely make out the eye, which is a 3D model moving every frame, so 24 frames per second. Animating hand-drawn 2D elements every other frame is simply done to save time, because drawing twice the frames obviously takes twice the time. Our eyes don't really notice that the effects only move on every other frame, so it costs nothing in terms of quality. This is done on virtually every animated production to save time. Now, not every single effect is animated on 2s, but the vast majority is. In these first few frames of this smoke effect, every frame is animated, for example, because the effect progresses very fast and needs to utilize all the frames available. If we go back to the scene with Silco, his eye being part of a 3D model doesn't face the limitations that 2D drawings do. The movement of the eye can be automatically interpolated by the program being used to create the 3D model, as I talked about in episode 1. So essentially it can move at any frame rate, which is part of the advantage of 3D animation. Sometimes some 2D animated shows or movies use an even lower frame rate, sometimes animating on 3s, 4s, or even 8s. An example is the newly Oscar-animated Danish movie called Flea, which is 2D animated on 8s. This makes it noticeably more choppy compared to something like Arcane or a Disney movie. Animating in lower frame rate is often done when doing concept art or storyboarding, since it saves a lot of time and still showcases the intended movement of elements in the scene, but it can also be a stylistic choice. The River Pilt, which the city is named after, must be more polluted than the Ganges River if one dip into it messed up Silco's eye to such a degree. The relationship between Vander and Silco is beautifully paralleled in Vi and Powder, which I will dive into later in the video. Similarly, the paternal relationship in Vi Vander and Silco Jinx also share many parallels, but it's unfortunately a little too soon to dive into that in this video. I will quickly put up a mild spoiler warning for something that is most likely going to happen in Season 2, so be warned if you don't care for that kind of speculation.
You kept my respect. Until you made peace with them. Played lapdog after everything we suffered.
So this line by Silco is one of several references to Vander possibly being a certain man-wolf hybrid character from League of Legends who will almost certainly be featured in Season 2. Obviously none of us know this for sure, but the backstory for a character from League named Warwich lines up perfectly with Vander. The show first refers to Vander as
Hound of the Underground,
and now as a lapdog. In episode 9 we get 2 more hints, first in the vision seen by Jinx, and later, well, see for yourself. In the lore, Warwick is an experiment by Singed, the doctor dude in Arcane, so this theory is all but confirmed. I urge anyone to check out Singe's bio on the League of Legends Universe webpage. He has an interesting backstory and has done some truly gruesome experiments. We're talking worse than Mengele level stuff with no care for ethics or any of that boring stuff. I'm honestly not sure if I'm emotionally ready for Vi to face down Vander in the form of a revived but tortured half-wolf, half-man abomination in Season 2. That's bound to be a wonderfully traumatic experience. Can't wait. At some point I plan to do a whole video theorizing about Season 2, where I'll dive more into the Warwick Theory among other things.
So far so good.
Counselor! Wait a minute,
What is it, my bedroom?
See you.
God, I love this line from Victor so much. One of the few lines that got a genuine laugh out of me. I could not help but wonder whether Arcane was teasing a romantic relationship between these two. I mean, why else would Victor sneak Jace into his supposed bedroom in the middle of the night?
Piltover, the land of progress, equality, innovation.
Among other things, Jace calls Piltover the land of equality, which is really quite ironic. It's tempting to call it ignorant, but as we learned from last episode, Jace has been to the Undercity to buy stuff for his experiments, so he really should know better. I mean, one look at the Undercity should be enough to dissuade any notions that Piltover is a place of equality, or perhaps he simply doesn't think the Undercity is a part of Piltover. It's possible Jace is simply saying what Mel wants to hear in order to get on her good side, but I'm honestly not sure he's capable of that kind of manipulation. I'm probably putting way too much thought into a throwaway line, but then again, that's my whole thing.
Oh, you're back!
I cannot ever get over how goddamn impressive the facial animations are in this show. I've said it before and I will no doubt say it again. The array of micro-expressions that play out across Vi's face in this shot is so well done. These brief shots of characters emoting no doubt take thousands upon thousands of times longer to animate than a similar shot would take to film in a live-action production. But in my opinion, this is an example where the benefits of excellent animation really shine through. No matter how good your actor or actress is, they are only human, and whatever emotion they convey in a scene will never be perfect. I mean, in most cases, with professional actors, the result will be more than good enough, and our monkey brains will understand and be properly affected by whatever emotion the character is supposed to be conveying.
What? No!
But there is always room for improvement. With animation, you can tailor every minuscule expression from the scrunch of a brow, the quiver of a lip, the glint in an eye to be essentially exactly how you want it, given enough time and skill. This makes well-animated character expressions such as those in Arcane ironically more accurate than is ever possible in real life. Every facial animation is essentially acted to perfection, every little muscle in the face moved in such a way as to exactly support the emotion being conveyed. There is no misunderstanding between the actor and the director in how a character should act in a given scene. There is of course still plenty of room for human error, but where an actor may have 10 takes to get it right, an animator has hours to perfect every single frame. Of course, the voice acting needs to be on point as well, or good character animation will be of little benefit. But luckily, Arcane has that nailed down as well. I am in a very animation-y mood in this video, it seems. Let's get back on track again.
I need you to sit this one out, Powder.
What?
Powder wants to help the gang. She clearly has low self-esteem and looks to her big sister for validation.
I can help!
You're not ready!
Vi saying she's not ready affects her deeply. In episode 1, Vi tells her the exact opposite.
What did I tell you?
That I'm ready.
That's right.
She sees Vi going back on that as a betrayal. Vi knows this and tries to comfort her, but I still think it affects her deeply. All she wants to do is live up to the expectations that she feels Vi has put on her, however misplaced they may be. She wants to pull her own weight and prove herself to her sister and the gang. All very noble goals of course, but ones that spectacularly backfire in the end. Characters having good intentions but ending up doing more harm than good is a central theme in Arcane the whole way through. As Jinx says in League of Legends,
I have the best intentions!
Arcane very much embraces the saying, no good deed goes unpunished, which I'll return to later in the video. As we swap back to Jace and Victor, I'd like to quickly mention how well Arcane handles the progression and interweavel of multiple storylines. In Act 1 there is a clear A-plot with everything happening in the Undercity and at Silco's base of operations, and a clear B-plot with Jace, Victor and the rest of the characters in Piltover. For now these storylines are separate and seemingly unrelated, but even though no two characters from either storyline interact in any meaningful way, the events taking place still affect everyone, which we'll get to later. As the story unfolds in Act 2 and 3, even more storylines are added and removed as events progress and characters meet or drift apart. Here is a diagram thingy that I made showing a rough overview of the different storylines and characters throughout the episodes. This took me like 20 to 30 hours to make, because apparently I'm a deranged masochistic maniac who thinks that, as we can see, the early episodes are more streamlined in terms of story threads in order to ease the viewer into the world and the characters. In Act 2, the story starts to really pick up with more parallel storylines that eventually converge with each other as characters meet up and interact. Arcane juggles all these storylines really well and paces itself accordingly so things don't feel too fast or too confusing with the parallel storylines. At times I feel the pacing is a little too fast and that Arcane bites off a little more than it can chew, but that's for a later video. This is all very reminiscent of the good seasons of Game of Thrones, before it all went to hell. Game of Thrones also did a brilliant job of balancing multiple characters across many parallel storylines that would eventually converge into just a few spectacularly disappointing ones.
And who has a better story than Bran the Broken?
Luckily, Arcane avoids that, at least for now. Powder does not take well to Vi and the gang leaving her. I think the show makes it a point to show us that the mental illness Jinx later suffers from was present even before the traumatic events of this episode, though these events certainly worsened her condition considerably. As with so many things, this is not explicitly stated, but I think the extent to which Powder negatively reacts to being left behind in this scene is meant to show that she already suffers from some unresolved issues that go beyond anxiety or insecurity. Powder has all but witnessed the deaths of her parents, been forced to grow up in very rough conditions, and any latent, possibly hereditary mental illnesses would basically be impossible to deal with in a place like Zorn. There is probably not a huge focus on therapy with how bad things are down there. Most likely Vi is aware of some of Powder's issues, since she treats her quite delicately and always puts her needs first, but that might just be the big sister guardian instinct. Another clear hint that Powder may have some unresolved issues is found in episode 8 with the story that Vi tells Caitlin about chasing Powder's monsters away. The monsters she helps chase away may refer to the hallucinations that Powder already sees at such a young age, or perhaps just her inner demons that Vi helped keep at bay by being a comforting presence. Whatever the cause may be, Powder feels abandoned and unworthy. She feels that Vi doesn't trust in her abilities and all she wants to do is prove herself. The simple monkey, which becomes Jinx's trademark, represents her troubled mental state, and later the careless, kill and explode everything mindset that Jinx embodies. As mentioned in the previous episode, the simple monkey originated from the Get Jinxed music video back in 2013 and is still synonymous with Jinx's, let's just say, problematic tendencies. Before we move on, there are a couple cool details in this scene that I wanna needlessly overanalyze. On the inside of the toy bunny's ear it says Violet, which we later learn is Vi's full name. She probably got the toy bunny when she was little, before her parents died. After that she had to grow up fast and had to get tough to protect Powder. She shortened her name to Vi because it's probably hard to cultivate an image of being a badass, fearless fighter with a name like Violet. And on that note, I actually genuinely love that her full name is Violet. It's such a gentle, pretty name. At first glance, it doesn't fit her tough demeanor, but as we learn, there is a gentle side to Vi that she has had to bury in order to survive in a harsh world. But it's still there, hidden just beneath the surface. Vi is tough and dangerous, but Violet is protective, caring and gentle. Violet is also just a single letter away from violent. Gentle but quick to anger and violence, that is the tightrope that Vi walks and eventually stumbles off of. When Powder drops the crystals, we see a drawing of the adoptive family with Vander, Milo, Clacker, Vi and Powder herself. Their faces are quite spooky and eerily similar to how they appear in Jinx's hallucinations. I think this is another hint that Powder's mental issues have been a thing for a while. Behind this drawing is another drawing, this one of Jinx's rocket launcher Fishbones, which is a neat bit of foreshadowing. Meanwhile, Incredible indeed, though I'm super duper lost on what exactly is going on with the Hextech thing. The show very intentionally breezes past any explanation of what this so-called arcane magic actually is or how it works. I completely understand why, and I think it's the right decision with so much else going on, but as someone who loves all that nerdy stuff about how magic might function in a fictional universe, it's a little disappointing. The same could be argued for Shimmer. It's not important to know why it works or what it is exactly, but it would be interesting. I do think there's a decent chance that these things are explored more in future seasons though. Yeah, this isn't suspicious at all. Vander's just sitting in a wide open room with no one around.
Fine. How did you get in?
It was easy. We found an open window and...
You have to get out. Now.
Welcome.
Good old Silco, using the adoptive father of a group of orphans as bait so he can trap and kill them. What a stand-up guy. It's important to Silco that his coup to overthrow Vander goes as smoothly as possible.
Have you heard the rumor? Vander the coward fled town with his children. And they were never seen again.
This fake narrative that he plans to tell the people of Zorn is proof of that. He probably realizes that taking down the generally well-loved leader and peacekeeper of Zorn is going to make him look pretty bad. Since plenty of people are still loyal to Vander, the plan is to drag his name through the dirt and paint him as a coward. Taking over then becomes much less troublesome and fewer people will want to rebel. Silco probably still tried to spin this narrative after taking over, but I doubt many people bought it after the fight and explosion and whatnot in this episode. Powder, hurry up! Go and save your family! I've seen enough movies to know that the underdog kid always comes through and saves the day. I'm sure this will be no different. I love the little look of surprise Silco gives. He has clearly underestimated what a couple of kids are capable of. Well, mainly one kid. Some nice 3D action right here with the camera moving behind Vi, showing her POV. I like how the setting that this fight takes place in makes it much more reasonable that Vi can take on all these goons by herself. Often in movies, whenever the hero has to take on a bunch of bad guys at once, it almost feels like the baddies are charging in one at a time for absolutely no reason, almost as if they are giving the hero a fair chance.
This is how it goes. You attack me one at a time, and I knock you out with a single punch, okay?
Arcane avoids this by having the fight take place on the narrow walkway where only one or two dudes can charge Vi at a time. I absolutely love how weighty the punches feel in this show. Vortish clearly has a great understanding of how the human body moves in these scenarios, and it really shows. Every aspect works together to create this amazing sense of oomph whenever Vi claps one of these fools. The wind-up where Vi's body tenses up, the follow-through with her whole body, and the hit itself combined with plenty of smear frames, as well as the satisfying clang of the gauntlets, just works so well. It's hard to describe, but you can just sort of feel the effort and strength Vi needs to use when swinging the heavy gauntlets. Man, all these kids are so capable. Milo got the lockpicking thing on lock, Clagger is using his strength to create an escape, and Vi is beating up people twice her size. I wonder when Powder's gonna chime in and help out as well. Silco is sort of testing Vi, playing with his food. He seems to enjoy seeing her struggle and is trying to figure out how much she can handle before she breaks. He probably sees her as a good test subject to really test the limits of how powerful his shimmer-fueled soldiers really are. I do wonder if Vi would have also beaten Sevika when she was this young. She has her gauntlets and Sevika doesn't yet have her shimmer-empowered arm. Silco doesn't seem like he wants to risk it, so he sends in desperate disposable deckhead instead.
Ready to rise to the surface.
Oh boy, this would sure be a great moment for Powder to step in and save the day.
You did good.
Understatement of the century. She just single-handedly beat down like 15 full-grown dudes and escaped a juiced-up Hulk guy. Give her a little more credit, Vander. And back to the science boys, working their hardest to make Hextech do something. Magic.
No pressure! That sounds like pressure!
At first I thought cutting between this storyline and the fight in the cannery was a little jarring. The magic stuff is cool and all, but it's hard to be completely invested in this storyline when the kids are literally fighting for their lives at the same time. It also doesn't help that it's difficult to see how this storyline relates to the other one the first time watching. I still think it's a little jarring, but I get what Arcane is trying to do. These stories don't directly relate to each other, but the common theme between them is the emergence of the powerful technology of Hextech. These two storylines directly contrast each other in showing the good and the bad side to this new technology. Top side, Jace and Victor are so preoccupied with whether or not they can create Hextech that they don't stop to think if they should. As with so many things in Arcane and in real life, honestly, the rich innovate without regard for the consequences, and those less fortunate are made to suffer. Jace and Victor don't see the bigger picture, they don't see the dangers of Hextech, or maybe they choose not to see it, they only see the possible benefits. While that is admirable, it's also very naive. Jace is not at all deterred by the explosion in his workshop and doesn't stop for 1 second to think of the devastation such an explosion could cause in the wrong hands, for example the hands of a certain blue-haired young girl. Or at least he doesn't until it directly impacts him, at which point it's way too late. This is so damn pretty. Here we get a little demonstration of the teleportation powers that Hextech apparently has. And so it is time
for the Era of Hextech.
Well, enough happiness and triumph. We just saw a glimpse of the potential benefits of Hextech, and now we get to see the incredible devastation it can also bring.
You have to work for me, okay?
At this point in the episode, we've already been put through the emotional ringer. Earlier, 2 named characters were killed and Vander was kidnapped. In the cannery, we went from cheering on Powder to save her family to now not being certain whether that is even necessary, let alone a good idea. Sure, Deckard might break through the reinforced door any minute, but Milo has freed Vander and Clacker has broken down the wall, allowing them an escape route. And as the tension grows, as we wait for the simple monkey to deliver its devastating payload, we begin to slowly realize that it's not over yet. Not by a long shot. The worst is still to come. Powder is elated. Her monkey bomb finally worked, and better than she could have ever imagined. Powder smiling as her bomb explodes, unconcerned with the fact that she is falling off a very tall building, or with the fact that her family is right next to the blast, is very Jinx-like. The fascination with destruction and complete disregard with safety or consequences is very much like Jinx. This part of her is present even before her so-called transformation. The bunny in this scene represents Powder's childlike innocence slipping from her grasp, as she is soon to discover that this fairy tale does not have a happy ending. The score that plays here is Powder's theme, the same one plays during the fight in episode 1. I definitely plan to do an analysis of the musical themes and leitmotifs in Arcane at some point, but I just don't think I have the time for that in this episode. This sequence of Powder falling is very similar to Silco's drowning scene from the beginning of the episode. They both use this calm blue and black color palette and use very similar perspective and framing. These 2 scenes are linked by the theme of rebirth or transformation, since Silco and Powder's transformations stem from a similar event of trauma and betrayal. This also foreshadows how their fates eventually become intertwined later on. The scene where Jace and Victor crack the secret of Hextech also uses a similar color palette and also has the characters floating, in their case quite literally. This scene also shares the theme of rebirth or transformation, as Jace and Victor stand on the precipice of sending Piltover into a new era of prosperity and innovation. On the surface, these 3 scenes share the same themes, which are expressed through the use of similar color palettes. But there are clear differences. The scene with Jace and Victor is overtly positive in nature. They convince Heimerdinger and Mel that magic can be harnessed through science, and now stand to be both successful, rich and powerful because of this discovery. This cost them basically nothing. Sure, Jace lost his workshop, but he will be given an even nicer lab now that Hextech is proven to work. But the scenes of Powder falling and Silco drowning is only positive on the very surface, and does not result in a positive change in the end. This is shown by the use of darker complementary colors. The same hue of blue is used, but it is complemented by darker backgrounds instead of the lighter colors of the astronomy tapestry above Victor and Jace. Instead, Silco and Powder are suspended in a dark void, being lured by a false sense of calm in what are inherently dangerous situations. Silco is seemingly at peace in the calm blue waters, but in reality he's being drowned by Vander and fighting for his life. Powder is in freefall, floating in awe and pride as her invention finally works as it is supposed to. But in reality she's falling with a real risk of being hurt in the process, while the bomb she set off is killing her family. This duality of a perceived positive change actually being negative is also portrayed in the colors. With Silco, the calming blue is contrasted with this nasty looking yellowish green as he's fighting for his life. This color represents betrayal and loss. This is the negative event leading to change. Silco is still traumatized by his brother turning on him, but as he later realizes, this traumatic event is what transformed him into who he is today. This screen shows up again when it's then Silco's turn to betray Vander as Benzo and Grayson are killed. Similarly with Powder, the blue tranquility is later broken by the consequences of setting off the bomb. As her family lies dead or injured, the green tinge of loss seeps through to taint what should have been a positive transformation of triumph for Powder. The final of the 3 colors used to signify change is red. I will get to what this color represents and how it is utilized, but we're not quite at that scene yet, so I'll put that on hold for just a few minutes. Oh wait, this isn't so bad after all. Just as we expected from watching countless Hollywood movies, the explosion only targets the villains, leaving our heroes virtually unscathed. Everything is right in the world. Everything is going to be fine. Oh, wait. But surely they won't actually kill the kids, right? Oh. This replaying of the explosion from different perspectives is a stroke of genius. Every time the monkey claps, things just get worse. Once again, Arcane beautifully subverts expectations and tropes to amplify the shocking twists of this moment. We all expect the kids to be fine. Killing off children in any movie or show is a major line to cross, which most movies or shows don't dare to do. You can do it, but it should be done with extreme caution and should be handled with appropriate care. So far, Arcane has only subtly shown us how dark it is willing to be. As I've mentioned several times, on the surface, the opening episodes of Arcane could easily pass for a kids' adventure show. Small kids making their way in a big world against all odds. Arcane relies on our knowledge of how such stories usually play out with whatever tropes and cliches this type of story entails. That's why this moment is extra shocking. Arcane breaks a sacred unspoken rule. You don't kill off the kids in a kids' adventure story, just like you don't kill the dog in a family movie. But of course, Arcane is not a kid's adventure story. It just masks itself as one in the first act in order for this very moment to be as shocking as possible. This scene is a great example of Arcane using the audience's preconceived notions against them. The first few times that we're shown the bomb exploding, we rely on our knowledge of storytelling rules to assure ourselves that everything will be just fine. Eventually though, it clicks. This is not that kind of story. A line has been crossed and we are now on edge and in uncharted territories. If the kids can die, what other rules no longer apply? Is anything or anyone even safe anymore? Well, this sucks. Not only is Powder's family dead or injured, she also didn't manage to kill Deckard, Silco or Sevika, and she blew down the door that kept them all safe from Deckard. Vander now has to fight, as he vowed never to do again. Last time he fought Silco over ideological differences, this time he's fighting to protect the lives of his 2 remaining children. At this point, Vander still doesn't know that Powder caused the explosion, and he never will. Unless, of course, he returns as a certain someone in Season 2, but that's beside the point. Vi, on the other hand, does at least know that Powder is there based on her reaction to seeing the head of the simple monkey. She doesn't yet know that Powder is responsible though, as we learn later on. Vander now goes full dad protection mode and charges Deckard head on. And as if Silco couldn't sink any lower, he literally stabs Vander in the back, paying him back for how Vander figuratively backstabbed him all those years ago. This shot is so cool. Vander's eye is bruised shut, making him look just like Silco. The desire to strangle Silco, finishing what he started all those years ago, reverting to that violent, remorseless man, makes him no better than Silco. He realizes this and lets him go. This is a moral victory. He proves to himself and to Silco that he's indeed not that man anymore.
I'm just not that man anymore.
Silco still wants to get the last word in though, but he doesn't really have much of a case.
I knew you still had it in you.
Vander didn't revert to that violent man he once was. He restrained himself in the end, just as he restrains himself from going after Silco when he injects himself with Shimmer. Even when under the influence of the rage-inducing drug, he still chooses to save instead of destroy, love instead of hate. This is the growth that Vander has undergone and Silco has yet to. One of the many great parallels between these two throughout the series. So Vander is fatally wounded and has no choice but to drink the magic juice in order to survive. At this point, poor Deckard has no chance. Vander snaps him like a twig and decides to save Vi instead of going after Silco. He shields her from the explosion and the fall, but mortally wounds himself in the process. As he dies in the arms of his daughter in all but blood, his dying words are... well, they're really unfortunate in the context of what's to come.
Take care of Powder.
This episode just doesn't stop delivering heartbreaking scene after heartbreaking scene without any mercy or regard for the well-being of the poor audience. And it's not over yet. When everything seems to have gone just about as bad as it could have, when the audience has almost turned into catatonic shells of human beings, Arcane decides that these characters and the audience by extension still haven't suffered quite enough.
Vi, it worked! What? Did you see me? My monkey bomb finally worked!
You did this?
After 9 months and countless rewatches of this episode, I still can barely stand to watch this scene. Powder's so proud of herself. Finally her invention works. She's finally proved herself to her sister. She can now pull her own weight in the group and grow away from that shy, insecure girl with so little self-worth. But no, this is Arcane. We can't have good things here. Powder is very insecure and will do anything to prove her worth. This is her fatal flaw. She knows what one Hextech crystal can do, but because she needs this bomb to work in order to earn the approval of the gang, she throws 2 crystals inside the monkey and then 1 outside for good measure, just to be absolutely sure it works. This is the deadly ingredient. The initial explosion does little harm to her family, but the errant crystal entering their room is what kills Clagger at the very least. Vi, on the other hand, is impulsive and emotionally driven. More often than not, she lets her emotions dictate her actions without necessarily thinking things through. This is her fatal flaw, and this is what leads her to make the biggest mistake of her life, right after Powder makes the biggest mistake of hers.
Why did you do this?
I was saving you. I only wanted to help my own.
I told you to stay away. I told you to stay away!
No!
I flinch every single time I watch this. It just really gets to me for some reason. Honestly though, I love that they did this, which may sound a little weird. I'm not saying I love violence against children, don't get me wrong. But I love that they dared to do this. You won't see many movies or shows where the protagonist physically hurts their own sister like this and doesn't somehow turn into the villain. This is another example of Arcane breaking with convention. The hero of the story, the guardian and protector, can't go around being violent to children, let alone their own sister. But the reason why it works is because Arcane is so great at writing flawed, believable characters. In a classic story, the hero is basically entirely good, and the moment they do something as bad as this, they've turned evil. Just like that. Black and white with no nuance of grey. But that's not the case for Arcane. Vi is a good person, but even good people can be pushed to the brink and make awful mistakes when emotions get the better of them. That's just being human.
Why did you leave me?
Because you're a jinx! Do you hear me? Milo was right!
No!
This is where Powder starts to fade away and Jinx is born. Where Silco was reborn in the waters of the river Pilt, Jinx is reborn in a baptism of fire. It's gotta be absolute hell for Vi to learn later on that Powder took on this name. The name is a constant reminder of the worst mistake of Vi's life and of her failure towards keeping her sister safe. It is however also a way for Powder to take back some control of her trauma, but that's a discussion for another time.
No!
Vi holding Powder's face like this is framed exactly the same as when Vander was strangling Silco earlier, drawing yet another parallel between their relationships and their falling out. And as Vi looks at her hands, now red with the blood of her sister, she realizes the depth of her mistake. She realizes too late what Vander learned and tried to teach her.
This? It's not gonna solve your problems. Just makes more of them.
She decides to walk away before she can hurt Powder further. Look at Powder as Vi stands up. She's shielding herself, expecting another blow from her sister. Jesus Christ, that's heartbreaking. It's also a cool detail that the strengths of both Vi and Powder end up being their downfall. Powder's knack for making gadgets and creating explosions is what kills her family. Her inventions work too well. Vi's physical strength, which minutes earlier saved them all from certain death, and her sharp tongue is what ends up hurting her sister, and what ends up creating a permanent rift between them. But in the end, they are both kids. Powder is not to blame for the deaths of her family. Her intentions were good. She wanted to save her family by utilizing her very specific skills. And yes, Vi asked her to stay at home, but no one can really fault an 11-year-old for wanting to play the hero. At the same time, Vi is hardly to blame for lashing out. She has just witnessed her two brothers die and has had her adoptive father die in her arms. Her whole world has come crashing down, and to top it off, she learns that her sister is responsible. Clearly, striking Powder is an awful thing to do and something she will regret for the rest of her life, but it is a realistic reaction, all things considered. And as Vi walks away, Powder calls out in desperation for her sister.
Why did you leave me?
Her biggest fear is abandonment, that her last remaining family will leave her. Because of her insecurities and possible mental health issues, she's convinced that her sister is leaving her for good. This is where Vi's full name is revealed. When Powder calls out for Violet, she's not calling out for the tough brawler leading their gang. She's calling out for her only remaining family. Her caring, gentle sister who helped raise her after their parents died. Most likely she's the only person who even knows Vi's full name, because she's the only true family she has left. And the performance.
I only wanted to help. I only wanted to help. I only wanted to help.
Mia Sinclair Jennings was 11 years old when she recorded Powder's lines in this scene.
To get into that place of vulnerability was hard for me.
How do you even channel that much pain into a performance when you're 11? That's just incredible to me. For this scene alone, she deserves all the praise in the world. Her performance turns the pain up to 11 and really makes this scene. In the midst of all this awfulness, I want to bring up the use of color again. Blue signified a tranquil, positive transformation, and green signified a negative transformation through betrayal and loss. And now we get to the final color, red. Or orange. These two are used somewhat interchangeably, so I'll just refer to it as red for simplicity. Red is used to signify a transformation incurred by trauma or rage. The color is literally used to symbolize a character seeing red. In this case, that character is Vi. We see this color in several other places. Earlier in the episode, after Grayson and Benzo were killed and Vander was kidnapped, Vi sits crying in the basement of Benzo's shop as the room is literally blood red. This represents both the trauma that Vi endures and the shimmer-fueled rage causing Deckard to tear Benzo and the Enforcers apart. In the same vein, the very first scene of the show also uses red to signify the same things. The fire and smoke on the Bridge of Progress seeps the scene in red as we see Vi and Powder's traumatic experience of losing their parents. At the same time, this color represents Vander's and later Vi's rage at Piltover and everything they stand for. And again, as Vander and Silco fight on the catwalk in the cannery, the red hues of fire and smoke is again used to signify both rage and loss, as Vander fuels all his grief into rage to protect his remaining kids. This red is also used when Silco looks up at Vander as he's drowning. And finally we are brought back to the present. The red of flames is again used to signify rage and trauma. Rage from Vi boiling over, causing her to hurt the one person in the world most important to her. The red again signifies the extreme trauma this night has caused them both, as Vi turns her back to her sister. But we are still not done.
This is the worst!
So far we've been subjected to 6 total gut punches, but let's add a few more on top, why not? As Vi calms herself, she looks up to see none other than slimy Silco standing with a knife over Powder. Protection mode kicks in, but goddamn Marcus wants none of it. To be fair, he probably saves her life, but he also makes everything so much worse for Vi, as we will see in later episodes. And now, when Powder is at her very weakest, certain her sister has left her after she inadvertently caused the death of their family, Silco makes himself known.
Hello, little girl.
He means to kill her with the knife still stained with Vander's blood in order to clean up a loose end. But upon seeing him, Powder pounces, as her biggest fear of abandonment causes her to desperately cling on to the first person she sees. Some people found it a little strange that she didn't run away from Silco or try to attack him, but she never really saw him in the warehouse or earlier. She doesn't yet know that he is essentially the one responsible for the horrors of this day. She just sees him as someone to seek comfort from at her lowest point. Silco still intends to kill her at this point, but as she says,
"She is not my sister anymore."
And as he looks up at his brother, he feels pity. He knows the sting of betrayal, of being hurt by the person you trust the most, by family. And so with a mix of genuine empathy and an unhealthy dose of cunning, he embraces her. I think he does genuinely want to comfort her, but he also clearly sees a vulnerable, malleable young child whose hatred and fear he can shape into a powerful ally. And so a very interesting and undoubtedly very toxic father-daughter relationship begins.
We'll show them. We will show them all.
Some fantastic imagery right here. This shot not only foreshadows Jinx as she ends up after episode 8 with the purple eyes, but is also clearly inspired by Alexandra Carbonell's famous painting Fallen Angel of Lucifer after falling from grace. Good stuff, Fortiche. And finally, as a closer to this hellish rollercoaster of an episode, we are treated to Ramsey's beautifully haunting and tear-inducing song Goodbye.
The sound of a heartbeat.
The camera pulls away, concentrating the fire that has changed Vi and Powder's lives forever into a single flickering flame, one that clings desperately to life, showing all at once Vi's fading consciousness, Powder's childlike innocent persona slipping away, and the connection between the sisters fraying, until finally, it's gone.
Think it's time to say goodbye. Goodbye, 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 goodbye. Oh.
The back end of this episode is expertly, meticulously crafted to just utterly obliterate our souls. This is a first production from first-time showrunners, mostly first-time writers, and a first-time voice actress delivering what is honestly a legendary performance. Like, how does that even make sense? How do you come out the gate swinging this hard? It's honestly mind-boggling to me. After watching Bridging the Rift, I'm somehow even more impressed than I already was. This is not simple stuff. The last 2 episodes were used to set the events of this episode up, luring us into a false sense of safety, making us care for these characters, and then smacking us straight in the face. No pun intended. This episode, and this scene in particular, was absolutely imperative to get right. The show has established the bond between Vi and Powder so well, and has shown us how strong it is. Nothing short of a complete tragedy would be extreme enough to warrant the falling out that the sisters have. Jinx's entire character essentially depends on this. I've already done a few Game of Thrones comparisons, but I'll do just one more for good measure. I'll controversially say that this episode is almost similar in shock and horror factor to the Red Wedding. The rest of the show hinges on this specific scene being pulled off perfectly. This is the point of no return, and it needs to be as soul-rending as it is to convincingly set up the rest of the plot of Arcane. But not only does this scene need to work perfectly, now the show also needs to pay off on this insane bombshell that has been dropped on the audience. This was my biggest concern after watching this. It feels like the finale to a series, but we are only at episode 3. How in the world was Arcane ever gonna follow up on this episode? Arcane needed to hammer home how massive of an event this episode was for the main characters. This episode needed to saturate the rest of the series like a festering wound left unattended. Nothing less would do for how traumatic and awful an event this is. And spoilers, Arcane does indeed hammer it home. Otherwise, I wouldn't be here. And that's a wrap. Whew, this video was rough to get done. Originally I planned to get a video out once every 2 months or so, but this one took me 6 months. At this rate I won't even make it through half the episodes before season 2 is released. I do hope it was all worth it in the end, because honestly I have no clue at this point. Well, I'm not gonna keep you much longer, we already passed the 1 hour mark on this video, which is honestly crazy. But anyway, I need to get this video done and forget all about it. 6 months is just too long to work on one project. I need a break. I need a vacation from my hobby. Not sure how that works. But anyways, as always, thank you so much for watching. And as I've said before, I live off your feedback. So please leave a comment with your theories or your thoughts, and I would love to read them. Oh yeah, and check out Bridging the Rift, the documentary about how they made Arcane. That stuff is just chef's kiss. Until next time, take care, and I guess I'll see you around whenever that may be.